or a data-centric application. I also help ensure that we have systems in place to monitor key performance indicators over time so we can help our clients measure the impact of our digital communications partnership. Farm to School program, the Educational Testing Service and Department of Education, and the list goes on from there. Very excited to be sharing some of the insights kind of across our history of work for these different influential organizations with you today. I'm joined today by Joe Pringle, who is the Director of Health at Socrata. So Joe, take it away and introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, hi everybody. I'm Joe Pringle, and I lead Socrata's work in the health.
Joe, if you're still there, we can give your voice a shot on the phone one more time to see if that works. Apparently, my sound is back now.
Okay, so Brian, I just switched over and now testing audio on the built-in audio. Is that better?
Sounds good to me. Just 1 second for confirmation. All right, keep on going through. Why don't you just kind of go through your agenda slide one more time for us, Joe? Sorry.
Okay, so just to confirm, Brian, the audio is better when I do it through the computer. Is that correct?
Yeah, everyone can hear us now. We're back online.
Okay. Okay, so I'm gonna kind of walk through this agenda and then we'll get started. I think we wanted to start with this idea of data matchmaking, and really it's about making the right data available to the right people in the right ways, in ways they can make sense of it and understand it and use it. We want to talk a little bit about how to figure out who those right audiences are and how to go about understanding their needs. We also want to share some best practices around how do you share your data to them and get it in the hands of them in the way that they want it and they want to explore and understand it in different ways. And then we want to present a case study on what this looks like in practice and then save some time for question and answer towards the end of the call. If you go to the next slide. What I wanted to start with is this idea around how data is really changing the way that we can have an impact on important issues. And it's impossible to go through a day and not hear about big data or analytics or data visualization. A lot of the buzz is around how the private sector is using big data and around how single organizations are using data inside the enterprise. But a lot of what I work on, a lot of what Brian and Forum One works on is how are we building communities around data? How are we helping organizations share data across organizational boundaries to move the needle on big issues like health or environment or education or social justice or international development? And that's, I think, both Brian does what he does and I do what I do because we're so optimistic around the power of data to really have an impact on these big issues. At the same time, though, I think the reality is that, if you go to the next slide, the reality is that a lot of ways that different organizations are sharing data or communicating data or providing access to data are ineffective. And the way I like to describe it is we're in this like Wild West period. We have been for a while, but where everybody's trying to figure out like how do you share data? How do you provide access to data? How do you allow people to understand it with visualizations or dashboards or tools? And I think the result of that is we see all this stuff going on out there that's not very effective. It might be dashboards that supposedly are making things understandable that actually make things confusing, or it might be tools for accessing data where you need to take a training to be able to figure out how to use the tool to even get at the data in the first place. So that's the reality that I think we're seeing out there. And what we wanted to do today is give you some of what we've been seeing and we've been learning over the past decade of trying to help improve impact with data and communicate data to different types of users in a way that they can actually succeed with. So I think I'd like to kick it back to Brian and have him sort of start us off here in exploring some of these ideas.
Thanks, Joe. So we're actually going to take a little trip back in time, even though we're just talking about kind of the promise of data today and in the future. We're going to go about 160 years or so into the past to start, and I promise it all makes sense. So let's fire up that DeLorean and do some time traveling. So we're going back to the Crimean War. Soldiers from Britain and France and the Ottoman Empire were dying in droves in the war and in wartime hospitals. And a young but accomplished British nurse actually volunteered to serve in the wartime hospital. So she crossed the continent and the Black Sea, motivated to serve. And what she found when she arrived were truly deplorable sanitary conditions in the military hospitals. And in fact, a lot of these volunteer nurses weren't even admitted originally into the hospitals to really affect any kind of positive change. But once they were gained admission there, she noticed these poor conditions and really poor data sharing and reporting among the different military hospitals. And in her time there, she set about to improve both the conditions and the reporting. And this nurse, as some of you may have known, was Florence Nightingale. And she was truly infatuated with data. She really took to it, if you read this quote, with sort of a religious fervor. And when she returned from the war, she was working on a report with all the data that she had collected on the conditions of the military hospitals and death from different types of diseases. And it was really quite massive. It was as it was coming together, she realized it was going to be very dense. It wound up being about 850 pages long. And she decided that most of the audiences that she was trying to reach with this report actually probably weren't inclined to read such a massive, dense document. So she was discussing some alternatives, and she had been familiar with the work really that just started about a generation before her in the emerging field of data visualization. So William Playfair here designed the first published bar chart. He was kind of a Scotsman and a Renaissance man, and he dabbled in a number of different things, one of which was being a pioneer in basic data visualization. And also, one of her contemporaries, John Snow, produced one of the first kind of widely publicized maps that kind of mapped data as it pertained to public health. In this case, mapping the cholera outbreak in London to try to get to what the source of it was in 1854. So she was aware of this kind of emerging field of data visualization, and she was discussing with her colleague, William Farr, the statistician, using some kind of data visualization and incorporating that into her long report. And here is what Farr had to say about it. And perhaps some of us have dealt with colleagues or others who feel this way. And the lesson here that I want all of you to take away is that Nightingale did not listen to William Farr in this instance. She knew who her target audiences were. They were the people who actually had the power to affect change and make improvements to sanitary conditions in military hospitals. And those were politicians, the Queen, British military leadership. Those were the people she was trying to reach. And she thought that these decision makers would be much more likely to look at pictures, even if they didn't necessarily read the words. So she dreamed up what is commonly known as Nightingale's Rose, which is this diagram. She never actually referred to it as Nightingale's Rose. Sometimes other folks called it Nightingale's coxcombs. Technically, it's a polar area diagram. But in any event, what she's trying to demonstrate here is that more soldiers were dying from preventable diseases, largely due to unsanitary conditions in these hospitals, than from combat directly. And so if you look at the diagram to the right, the areas that are shaded in blue, those are all the preventable deaths, largely due to these unsanitary conditions. The shading in red are actual kind of combat wounds. So it's pretty dramatic and pretty remarkable. Now, what she's also trying to demonstrate is after she gained access to the hospitals and had the chance to start treating these folks and improving the sanitary conditions, and this is kind of the diagram, kind of the smaller one to the left, which is not very easy to compare in this model, she's demonstrating that the preventable deaths actually decreased pretty dramatically after she was able to affect her change. And so it worked. Her reporting had really a lasting and an immediate impact. So there were immediate improvements in the sanitary conditions in the hospitals. She really caused quite a stir by distributing pamphlets with her data visualizations to key politicians. And she ultimately persuaded the government to set up a royal commission of inquiry into the sanitary conditions of the Army. So her lasting impact was pretty tremendous. And I think it just goes to show the power of truly understanding your audience and what they're going to respond to, and really even which audience you need to reach in order to affect the kind of change that you're trying to make in the world. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Joe, who's going to walk us through a framework about how we can start to understand our audiences better.
Okay, thanks, Brian. So I wanted to start with a few thoughts of just how to figure out who those right audiences are, how to get started along that. And if you go to the next slide, Brian, really there's a way to think about this that it can kind of scale to lots of different situations. And really the key is to start with your goals. It might be the goals of your organization, it might be your project or initiative or activity, and really it may be, you might call them different things, but it's really how do you measure success? What outcomes are you trying to achieve? And then really putting those front and center, and from that figuring out the people, the types of people that you need to reach or inform or influence to achieve those goals. So that's really step one. And I'll say it again because it's so important. Start with your goals and figure out the people that you need to reach or inform or engage with to achieve those goals. That's sort of the top of the pyramid. And because our topic today is about data, we want to actually zero in on who are we trying to reach or inform or influence with data in some way. And so the next step is to sort of go from the bottom up and map out what are the data assets, what are the types of data or data sets that you have as an organization or your partners have that you can bring to bear and share or communicate or provide in some way that creates value and helps you make progress towards these goals. And then, so in effect, you've sort of mapped out the top of the pyramid and you map out the bottom of the pyramid, and then that's where it starts to get a little messy, where at that point, what you want to try to do is figure out, like, what are the questions or the use cases that these different important audiences might have with data that they want to ask of our data, or data that helps them do their job or create some value in some way. And that gets a little messy. In some cases, this might be something you can do with a whiteboard with a small group of people. In other cases, it might be a longer, more formal process where you go out and you have to kind of document this in some way. I think some of you might be on the phone saying, well, I don't know what these questions or these use cases are. And that's where that's really the place to start. If you don't know what those are, then you need to solve that problem. You need to go out and understand those audiences as a first step. So Brian's going to share a little bit about how to approach that, what sort of approaches or techniques you can use to begin to understand your audiences better.
Yeah, so to Joe's point, there are a number of different approaches that you can take that are proven, and these are the sorts of things that Joe and I have done many of over the last decade or so. Here are a couple common approaches that you can apply. So conducting interviews with actual kind of representative members of the audience you're trying to reach to understand their motivations and use cases and behaviors and preferences and whatnot. Conducting focus groups with again kind of representative members of your target audiences, but kind of in a room together. And I'll just share a quick story here. If you look at the example to the right, the image, that's actually one storyboard that we put together for the EPA's Climate Change Division when we were designing the greenhouse gas flight database that maps greenhouse gases across the across the U.S., greenhouse gas emissions. And one of the things that we did, one of the tactics we did, was to actually bring together representatives, researchers, advocacy folks, and whatnot from leading environmental NGOs in the DC area to kind of focus group these initial draft storyboards that we had produced for this application that we were eventually going to kind of complete design for, to ensure that we had the right use cases, that these all made sense. And those focus groups were really useful and really did kind of force us to change direction, change labels, change some user actions and whatnot to make them more useful to the folks who will actually be using this tool. Surveys are a great means to gather more quantitative information from a larger group of users. One really easy way to conduct a survey of your target audiences is to leverage your existing email list or a segment of it. I'm sure most, if not all of you, have access to something like that you can use for a survey. Field studies are interesting. These are where you're actually kind of going into the trenches, if you will, and observing someone using or digesting your data or your application in their own environment. So if for example, you're trying to design a data exploration tool that you want journalists to use, you would actually schedule an appointment with a journalist and visit them at their place of work and observe them kind of using this tool or tools like it in their actual kind of office or work setting, sort of as a fly on the wall. Web analytics, we are big fans of web analytics and using them to understand actual usage patterns. This is obviously only applicable if you're sharing your data in some fashion on the web, and you can actually tag it with analytics code. And it also assumes that you have something existing. You have a baseline that you can basically gather an existing application of sorts, but using that to understand trends. And then lastly, usability testing. So this is where we're actually, once we've gotten down the path of design or development of a data solution at a certain point or at multiple points during the course of a project, actually testing the usability of that specific tool that you're developing with members of your target audience, ensuring that they can complete very common tasks, similar to the sort of tasks that we're mapping out at a very high level in these storyboards in this example here. So a number of different approaches that are pretty common in the industry and that you can kind of mix and match to serve your purposes here. One really common outcome of audience research or product that can kind of come out of it are known as personas. Some of you may be familiar with these. Essentially what they are archetypes. You're basically creating a fake user of your tool, your application, or your strategy even. But they include representative characteristics of this audience type that they're meant to represent out of, and you're pulling the data from the different audience research activities you conducted in order to put together a persona for this fake person who would be a user of your data in some way. And it's a really nice and concise way to present this information. And personas can include any number of data points here. You can see some examples here. It doesn't necessarily need to be limited to these bullet points, but you can see the sort of information that you may include in a persona that you can glean from your audience research. And one thing is that if you actually don't have the time or the budget or the ability to produce your own personas, or if you're just looking for inspiration, you can find a number of really valuable, well-done personas available for free on the web. They're not going to map kind of specifically to your organization since they're developed with a different organization in mind, but there may be some kind of overlapping data elements within each of these personas that you can apply to your organization. So for example here, HHS has a number of different personas that are made available for archetypes like the healthcare professional or the grantee or the public policy professional. So you can use these for inspiration or a starting point or to complement your own persona development or user research. Now, with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Joe to tell you the good news about what you can be doing even without extensive audience research.
All right, so thanks, Brian. So I might make one comment about what Brian just shared. Like, I think, you know, our general advice to organizations we work with is that, you know, money and time and effort spent on understanding audiences and really understanding their needs is almost always a very wise investment. And, you know, especially if you're talking about technology projects or data or analytics, like rushing and building stuff just because you think it's the right stuff can often be, you know, an order of magnitude or more costly than some of the research approaches or techniques that Brian just shared. So that's one point. I think, and at the same time, there are ways to do quick and dirty things too, where you know, there's plenty of times where you're not going to be able to do a big, you know, formal audience research activity, and that's fine, you know, but do some informal interviews or other ways just to talk to who you think are your end users and understand them better. That will pretty much always be time well spent. So what we want to do now is cover some things that we've observed and learned over the past decade doing audience research for how to use data for policy impact, and that includes understanding researchers and policymakers and the media and developers and entrepreneurs and others that might be using data or communicating or viewing data. So we wanted to just share some things that we think you can use now, some best practices or tactics. But the caveat would be, you know, some of these may be more or less appropriate for each of you, depending on what specifically you're trying to do and what kind of the nature of the groups you're engaging with. So with that, if you go to the next slide, I think what we wanted to do is, in our view, one way we like to think about data is, you know, helping our customers increase the audience base for it. So we want to help them get their data into the hands of more of the right people. And if they're only reaching 1,000 people that are people they care about right now, but there's 100,000 of those types of people out there, we want to figure out how do we get the data out there to more of those people. And then second, how do we make the data more useful, more actionable, and more understandable? And so by increasing the reach and increasing the utility, that's really how we can increase the impact of what we're doing. So let's start with, how do we get the data into the hands of more people? The fundamental thing you need to do is make your data easy to find. So let's talk a little bit about what that means. First and foremost, it's make it discoverable. And for anybody that looks for stuff in the web, there's one place we all go, and you need to be thinking about, how do I make my data discoverable to Google so it can make my data discoverable to people? And you know, there's a lot of things that, you know, in terms of SEO and other best practices for metadata and things like that, that all applies to data as well. And so a lot of times we'll come across a zipped CSV file or some other, you know, data set that's just kind of plopped on a web page, and like that stuff is invisible to Google. It can't then allow people to find it easily. So think about that as you publish data, and there's more sophisticated things too. Like as you publish data, there's standards. There's something called schema.org for publishing structured data, and that's like, ideally you're publishing data in a way that not only can Google list it as a search result, but it can pull information out of your data and then display it right there on Google. So that's what we're seeing here on the screen. You know, for a lot of searches these days, if you search for stuff like movies or restaurants, or in this case it's clinics, you'll see information, phone numbers, locations, maps, information from the actual structured data rather than just a link to a search result. And this is absolutely huge. You can reach a much bigger audience with your data. The thing is, they're going to consume it right there on Google, but you've still accomplished your goal. So that's a huge part of making your data more discoverable. If you go to the next slide, a second part of that is thinking about kind of how to push your data out to lots of different places. Like, don't think of your website as your playground, and anybody who wants to come play with your toys has to come to your playground to do it. Instead, think about your data as something you want to push out to every corner of the internet and every app and places where your target audiences reside. And rest assured, there's orders of magnitude more of your users out there that are never going to come to your website. So think about your data as something you want to push out there. You want to push it out to Facebook or Twitter or social media or LinkedIn. In the case of the health domain, we want to push it out to different types of health sites where people access health information. There's tons of consumer-facing apps and tools and mobile devices where, like for restaurant inspections and health inspections, delivering that at the point of use, like in an app on a phone and Yelp, rather than a .gov website, is a way to reach a much, much bigger audience with your data. So that's the second point. If you go to the next slide. Also, there are definitely things you can do on your own website. Often, groups we work with, they do publications, they do analyses, and they put out these as content on their website, and then the data is like somewhere else. You have to go to some other place to find the data. We like to see pathways for people who read the publication. If they want to drill into the data, we should make that easy for them. Don't make them work too hard. Next slide. And lastly, metadata is your friend. This applies much more to groups with lots and lots of data assets or data sets they want to share. But if you're in that boat, one of the things you want to think about is how to make it easy for people to browse across your data, how to make it easy for them to search, and definitely a key for that is metadata. And if you want the gold standard, go to Amazon, where you can browse through to very specific products. Really going through these intuitive categories of hierarchical metadata, so you can sort of click on each category and subcategories. You can really find things very easily, and that's what we want to focus on here. Is how do we obsessively reduce the amount of clicks and the amount of time it takes for someone to find what they're looking for. If you go to the next slide, some of the metadata, the types of metadata that we typically see for data. People tend to be interested, obviously, in topics and subtopics like types of diseases or types of drugs or other sort of policy-specific taxonomies for topics and subtopics. We have, the source of the data, date ranges, formats, different types of breakouts that you might want to use, the level of granularity of the data, geography of the data. These are things that we see for a lot of data audiences. These are things they want to use as a way to search for data. If you go to the next slide. So that's a bit about making your data easier to find. Next, what I wanted to do is discuss, let's imagine I've found the data that I want, and I've clicked on it, and I'm trying to figure out how to access the data set and use the data set in some way. Let's talk about some best practices around that. Next slide. So here's a common phenomenon. You think you find this data set, it's kind of posted as a downloadable Excel file or a zipped file, or worse, a PDF table on a downloadable PDF, and the data looks like this. And so right now, like this data, it has cryptic column headers, it's got encoded values in the data set. This data is really hard to use unless I'm familiar with this data set, unless I know where the data dictionary is and I know where to go find this thing. All of a sudden, I have to do a tremendous amount of work to make this useful. And so one of the things we work with our customers on is, if you do a little bit of work to have human readable column names, to decode your data sets, just do a little bit of work once, and then every time someone accesses that data set, they don't have to do the work again. So you've saved a tremendous amount of effort for your users by doing something once, and they don't have to repeat it every time they access the data. Next slide. There's also a set of metadata that data customers tend to want. And so these, again, there's a range here, and this might apply towards more sophisticated types of users, researchers, and others who are pulling data into their research or other similar things. They often, they want to know, why is this data important? What's the significance of it? What's in the data? What's not in the data? Where's the data dictionary? what is the chain of custody? Who touched this data and transformed it, or if so, what transformations occurred? Like how was it cleaned up or changed? How was it collected? What's the frequency of updates? Are there data use agreements or licenses that I need to navigate to be able to use this? And also, who's a contact person? And who's a person I can reach out to, an actual human that knows something about this data that I can talk to and get some information. So these are things that, like, if you're actually putting out data and you want people to use it and pull it into their work, these are things that they typically want to know, and you should think about how to include that as part of your metadata. Next slide. The other thing is what we tend to see with data is, like, there's this sort of diversity of uses. There's lots of different types of use cases. There's different people want to use data in different ways, and so, like, allowing, as you publish data, publish it in different ways that make it easy for people helps. It just reduces the barriers for them to take advantage of your data, and that might mean different types of formats, like crosstab, human readable tables versus database format, which is much easier to pull into and integrate or link up with other data. It might mean file formats like JSON or CSV or Excel, or connectors like endpoints that increasingly we're seeing tools like Tableau or R or other visual analytics tools. You can actually just connect directly to data without having to download it, and this is especially valuable for data that's updated on a regular basis. It really helps your data customers out. So provide your data in a range of formats. Next slide. Lastly, there's lots of time and effort and expense spent on exploration tools and visualization tools, and sometimes these, like, they're great in theory, but if you're not careful, it's easy to create a tool that nobody uses, and the problem is presenting too many things to the user and requiring them to read a big help document or a training manual or something just to understand how to explore data. It's a deal breaker for a lot of users, and so this interface in particular, I counted it up. It's like 175 different things for a user to click on. That's too much for a user to process. If they're just interested in saying, show me a trend across these states, or let me compare, this indicator for these two different organizations. Simple informational goals, like, you can't figure out how to achieve it with a complicated interface. So if you go to the next slide, one of the principles that we like to see is, like, keep it simple, minimize the choices that you're presenting to the user, and in some cases, allow data exploration, allow drill downs, allow comparisons, but try to remove all the extra clutter, so that in this case, if people want to drill down and understand financial information in an intuitive way, they can just sort of figure it out. They can just click on stuff and get answers and make comparisons without having to navigate an extremely complicated interface. So those are some best practices that we've seen around how do you make your data easier to find, how do you make it easier to access and explore in different ways. I'm going to hand it back to Brian and let him talk about how to better present data for impact in a more curated and a more tailored sort of way.
Sure. Thanks, Joe. So, why bother present your data in the first place? Why bother telling stories with it? Well, data storytelling or visualization, it's one way to help your audiences better understand your work. So even if all you're trying to do is demonstrate that there is some value here in the data that you're making available, and in order to kind of clearly communicate that value, there are a number of different approaches that you can take. And of course, if the topic and the quality of the data or the data story are of interest, you can garner a lot of media attention, for example, which can increase overall dissemination of your data, if that in fact is your kind of end goal. But ultimately, we find that most groups that we're working with want to make some kind of a positive impact by sharing and presenting data. So if you think back to the Nightingale example. And this can come in a number of different formats. So these are some kind of general impact goals, right? Spread the word more broadly, spread your message or your key data finding more broadly. Influence and improve decision making. A lot of folks are really focused on reaching a very kind of small community of policy influencers. So we want to design data stories that align with their needs. Encouraging behavior change. Perhaps you're trying to reach maybe a broader audience. Maybe you're working in kind of the public health sector and you're working on behavior change with respect to a broad audience, perhaps a national audience. Maybe you want to communicate your data in a way that will resonate with them. Or maybe you're just looking to kind of share your own successes and failures by presenting the data that you've collected as an organization, so demonstrating transparency. And maybe there are some other impacts or outcomes that you're expecting, but this is just kind of a sampling of them. Well, along these lines, last year I co-authored a white paper called Communicating Data for Impact with my colleague Nemho Park and with Peter Spire, who's the Chief Data Officer at the Institute for Health Metrics and Evaluation. And like Joe and myself, these guys have kind of been working with data and communicating data to different audiences for many, many years. You can read the whole paper at communicatingdata.org. But here's what we called our cheat sheet from the paper, which maps common audience types to example data storytelling approaches on the right. And what we've done here is I've aligned kind of an icon with each of these different audiences. So keep those in mind. They're going to come in useful in a moment or two. My team at Forum 1 was presented with a data storytelling challenge a couple of years ago with the State Health Access Data Assistance Center, commonly known as SHADAC, and they're a grantee of the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation. And they were in the process of authoring this report on state-level trends in health insurance through work. And there were some interesting findings in this report, but again, it was going to be kind of made available as a PDF, and you know, it was going to be rather long, and we really wanted to find a way to kind of pull some of those key findings out and better disseminate them to key audiences. And now, thanks to the World Bank, we actually have statistical proof that no one is reading your PDF. We didn't know that at the time, but we had a hunch. And you know, just a couple of words about this particular study. This is a study done at the World Bank from their web properties, looking at downloads of different reports that they had generated, and they basically found that the vast majority were downloaded very few times, including 517 reports that were not downloaded at all, which is really pretty remarkable if you think about the amount of funding that and time that went into drafting and publishing those reports. So that information's not getting out there in a broad way if kind of the PDF is your end game for it. So what we did was we unpacked some of the key findings from this report that SHADAC was releasing, and we came up with the idea to develop a set of infographics that would clearly communicate the findings in the report. So we worked with SHADAC and with some partner PR agencies to identify the key messages from the report. And then we designed these rather straightforward infographics that complemented the PDF rather than replaced it. So this was the primary finding of the report at a national level. And I want to highlight a couple things here. One is that even though this was a data-focused infographic, we weren't afraid to use real words. The key message is basically stated in the infographic. Health insurance through work was steadily declining nationwide before the Affordable Care Act. And then that key message is then backed up by the chart to the right. And a couple of points about the kind of data visualization itself. We had data from all 50 states, so we could have very easily had 50 downward trending lines from 2000 to 2011 on this graph. But that would have essentially rendered it unusable. No one would have been able to really interpret it. They would have all kind of cluttered together. It would have been really hard to see which line corresponded to which state, etc. So instead, we just selected kind of 4 representative states with employer-sponsored insurance at different levels over time, just to get a kind of representative sample of the data. And we compared those 4 to the national average, which nicely kind of fit right in the middle of those other 4 data points. The other key thing is that since the main point we're trying to communicate here is that the decline was happening pretty dramatically before the Affordable Care Act was enacted. We kind of started the trend line back at 2000, and then we also indicated exactly when health reform was enacted. So there's no guesswork that really users have to do in this example. And again, with respect to those icons and kind of communicating this data story to specific audiences, we were thinking about here reaching kind of an interested individual, kind of a general audience, as well as who we describe as data actors, like journalists or folks who are going to take your data and then further broadcast it in some way. There was also a secondary key story in this report. It was a secondary story because this finding had essentially been reported before, but it was kind of confirming some data that you know some of the audience of this report was going to be aware of. But we wanted to develop a separate infographic for this as well, because the fact that young adults were staying on their parents' insurance at a higher rate was important, and another key finding. So we wanted to develop a separate, easily communicatable infographic from that as well. And then beyond kind of the lead national stories, we also had the luxury to develop a local angle. So I mentioned before we had data from 2000 to 2011 on employer-sponsored insurance from all 50 states. And so we thought, what a great opportunity for localized media attention. You know, everyone loves a good local story. And so what we did was develop a template that could then be used to serve as a data visualization for each individual state. And then all we had to do was kind of plug in the unique data points and plug in the state name, and voila, you have your kind of customized infographic. So we actually produced a full set of these, and then in our media partners' press outreach, they included, along with the press release, both the national infographics as well as the one that was specific to the state of the media organization they were reaching out to, which I think was a really nice approach. There are 2 different examples here, and they're actually 2 different ways of visualizing the same data. The left happens to be Arkansas, the right happens to be Wyoming. I would just ask you in your minds right now to guess which of these 2 concepts won. We actually wound up testing these on a few users before deciding. It'd be interesting to know what you thought. Well, here you can see what the results were, and they were really pretty nice. These were just kind of instances of republishing our infographics without touching them at all by the Boston Globe, by a local news outlet in Michigan. And there in the Michigan example on the left, you can actually see which of the infographics won. So it maybe to some folks it wasn't like the sexier of the 2 examples, but it more clearly communicated the data. And that's a really important lesson. The most highly designed data visualization is not always the one that's going to more clearly communicate the findings, and the latter is really what we're going for here. So we were really pretty happy and pretty proud about the republication of these infographics that we produced. And all in all, the report was really widely disseminated in its findings. It reached more than 300 media outlets, including some of the different groups mentioned here. But we didn't stop there. So that kind of focused on our primary audiences of interested individuals and the data actors, again, the journalists who were further communicating those findings and disseminating them to other members of the public and politicians and others. But we also had other data audiences that we wanted to reach, including analysts interested in health insurance policy, other researchers who wanted access directly to the data. So we designed a landing page, a custom landing page on the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation website that included kind of the key findings and links to download the full report and the press release and the media contacts. And actually further on down this page, we also embedded the infographics. And we didn't stop there either. There happened to be a tool that the foundation had recently developed that allowed you to make kind of create your own interactive visualizations with some common data points. So we are actually able to create interactive visualizations pretty easily that complemented the report as well, and then published and linked to those interactive visualizations from that report landing page. And so this is something that might be interesting to a user like an analyst who's really kind of looking at different trend lines and wanting to compare specific states to each other and compare the data over time. As well as for the researchers, I actually have a line here pointing to how you can download the full data set right at the top of the page, which aligns nicely with one of Joe's points. Make it really easy for users to download the data. That's oftentimes what a lot of the researcher audience really wants to do. And then finally, we also saw some really interesting reuse of the data. Because the data was made available to different groups for download, a number of different media organizations like USA Today and CNN, Money here, actually took that data and reused it for their own purposes. They developed their own visualizations. They told their own data stories that maybe didn't align directly with the key findings or the key messages of the report, but that's really okay. That's the job of journalists, and we were really pleased to see them continuing to increase the reach of the data coming out of this report and creating their own visualizations. So all in all, it was a really successful effort, and I think I attribute the success of it both to the work of SHADAC and our partners, but also to kind of our understanding of the right ways to communicate the different data and data points to these different types of audiences. So to kind of summarize what we learned today, we hope you kind of took away some tools, some approaches, some ideas that you can bring back to your job, whether it's ways that you can conduct some audience research or summarize that information, or even just kind of more carefully considering what you're trying to achieve and who you're trying to reach with your different data assets. In addition, Joe gave some good tips about some things that you can get started doing right now, even probably without having to conduct a ton of research to get started, even though we know that the research itself is really valuable. So without further ado, I want to kind of turn it over to the discussion portion, and I'm going to take a look at the questions that have come in thus far. So here's one. I think this is a good one for Joe. Someone asks, how do I find my organization's data sets? I'm not sure where to look. Joe, do you have any insights into that? Maybe somebody working at an organization and they suspect that there's good data available and they're not sure where to find it?
That's an awesome question. One thing I like to do, just to sort of see the public-facing data that's out there, is do a Google search where you take the site, your domain, and you do file type equals .xls or CSV. I just do kind of an open Google search for file types and look for Excel spreadsheets and CSVs, and usually you find like hundreds for large organizations. They're all over the place. So that's one way, but that's only going to show you what's out there already publicly available. I think, I guess going beyond that takes more effort, and to me it's really about going around to different parts of the organization and asking. And different programs or activities, going to someone involved and saying, hey, do you have valuable data? If so, who are you sharing it to now? And what would be ways we could innovate or share your data more effectively? So I would go around internally and ask people who might be associated with different programs or activities, producing or collecting or managing data in different ways.
Great. Here's one that I'll probably take, and then Joe can comment if he'd like. What if my organization doesn't have goals in the sense of trying to influence direction of something? If I just want to report data, how can I still prioritize my efforts? Yeah, I think that's a pretty common question. You know, a lot of organizations, like particularly government agencies, have a mandate to provide kind of access to their data, maybe even in multiple and machine readable formats, which is great. But because of the nature of their organization and not kind of allowed to be overtly political or advocating for anything in particular, sometimes they can't be particularly transparent about what they're trying to achieve, or they can't make a statement about what they're trying to achieve, with that dissemination. And what I would say is that the activity of providing access to data kind of in and of itself suggests that there's value there. And if you're suggesting that there's value to the data that you're releasing to the world, the best way to measure impact and then to design solutions that will help you achieve that impact is to understand which groups are downloading, making use, maybe repackaging that data, kind of, you know, to that Robert Wood Johnson Foundation example where I was showing the couple of media outlets that were reusing the data in their own formats. I would count that as a success. So I would kind of design a solution around how can I get kind of the widest possible distribution of the data, kind of regardless of what folks are doing in terms of how they're messaging with it. All right, let's do one more, another one for Joe. How do we go about figuring out what data is most valuable to our audiences?
Okay, another great question. For this, what I really like to do, I mean, part of it is in your audience research. Brian kind of talked through different approaches for interviewing and kind of surveying and understanding audiences. Absolutely, one of the things that I would want to know is what data that we have is most valuable to you. I would want to be asking that question in different ways to people. There might be, you know, sometimes some of our customers get requests or, you know, feedback coming in through their website, especially if it's like a data-focused website where people are actually, you know, asking for data in the feedback. Like I like to look at the feedback logs and, you know, coming in through a website for what data people might want to have. Or there might be other like communities around your data that you work with, people you know that are like power users or partners. I would, you know, fundamentally just be asking people that question: what data is valuable? What would help you in your work? What kind of data do you need as a partner or a researcher or an entrepreneur or developer or whatever? What do you need from us in a way that will help you? And so that would be a sort of a range of approaches I would take on that one.
Great. And then we'll have time for one more, I think. Here's one. You mentioned the World Bank study that reported that nobody reads your PDF. Does this mean we should stop publishing PDFs to our website and use something else? No, and in fact, I'm glad you asked that. That's not kind of the intent there. I think what that World Bank finding really communicates is that it's not that the PDFs themselves or the reports themselves are not valuable and that's why they're not being downloaded. I think it mainly suggests that it's a failure of you know, many organizations or challenge many organizations face to effectively market the really interesting content and findings and data that are in those reports and more effectively disseminate those findings. That'll then inspire people to drive them back to the organization's website and actually download the report. The PDF itself, there's not really a huge problem with, and it's still really valuable to a number of different audience types. So no, I wouldn't encourage you to completely stop publishing PDFs, but rather to find other ways to attract people to your PDF by complementing it with more kind of user-friendly or web-friendly tools and approaches. So with that, I think we're going to wrap up today. But we really appreciate you joining us. And if you have any follow-up questions for either Joe or myself, you have our contact information here. you can give us a ring or send us an email, and we'd be more than happy to continue this conversation offline. So thanks so much for participating today.